Добре дошли на всички. Hello everyone. So you already know my name, but still I had a slide about it, so I'm going to show it. My name is Bozhidar, and it is very funny for me to be standing in an audience which is comprised mostly of Bulgarians speaking in English because my English sucks, and I know that your Bulgarian is perfect. But I also know that you'll be more forgiving than most audiences about crappy Bulgarian accents. So it is what it is. I'm very excited to be here, and I hope that my talk won't bore you too much, at least not too much. I will also have a guest speaker who will be making funny appearances here and there during the course of my talk. This is my good friend Yuan. Many of you have probably met him because you know in Sofia Yuan is pretty famous. Here you can see Yuan in all his glory, you know, a very handsome, very smart fellow, doing very funny things all the time. Before we start, there are a couple of important things about me that I feel you should know. This I should skip because Sasha already told it, but I just wanted to mention that a company is much more than just a fancy logo. It is the people that are behind the logo, and for me it is an honor and a privilege to work alongside so many smart, talented individuals who are capable to drink and party very hard, as you see in the evening. The most important thing about me is that I'm an Emacs fanatic. I dislike all the editors and all the integrated development environments which are not named Emacs, and I would probably not respect you very much if you're using anything other than Emacs or Emacs. I still have nightmares from my short career as a PHP developer. You know, I wake up at 3 a.m. all sweaty, wondering things that I shouldn't be sharing with you because, you know, this is a nice conference and we don't need to talk about nasty things. I love Ruby very much. I am a Ruby developer, or at least I was a Ruby developer back in the day when people are allowing me to actually develop stuff. You know, the VP of engineering does a lot of things, but no engineering. Although I am very familiar with the Rails framework, my feelings towards it are kind of a mixed bag. I can say that it's a very nice framework, it is very powerful, but honestly speaking, developing in Rails doesn't make me happy anymore, and this has been the case for a few years now. And I can also tell you that I don't like JavaScript. I don't like JavaScript one tiny bit. I can go into many details, but you know, if the good part of our language is just a tiny part of a huge language, something is fundamentally fucked up. So, why am I here? No further bullshit. I'm here with two questions on my mind. What is the current state of the Ruby ecosystem, and especially the Ruby web ecosystem, and what is the state of the current web development ecosystem overall? I feel that both communities have some serious problems in recent years, and I'd very much like us to discuss those. And I also hope that I can propose one potential solution, just a potential solution, but who knows? So, before we start, how many of you here are Ruby developers? Oh, so many hands, that's nice. For the benefit of all the other people, I will do a quick intro about Ruby and its community. Rewind the time until 2005, and if you ask somebody about what is the Ruby programming language, you'll get faces like this. Nobody had any idea what Ruby was, despite that the language was created by this Japanese fellow 10 years ago. So it was a pretty mature language already, but absolutely nobody outside of Japan had any idea about it. Then this professional race driver, who used to be a junior web developer back in the day, met Yukihiro Matsumoto at some meetup or something, decided that he was tired of writing PHP and created a web framework in Ruby, which became somewhat popular. The framework was released in December 2005, and in 2006, Ruby was elected the most promising new language of the year. It was deemed super great, Rails was super awesome, people were getting excited. Comments like, oh my god, Rails is amazing, were the norm back in the day. By 2008, Rails was not only amazing, it was also useful. Because I don't know how many of you have seen version 1, but it had a few shortcomings, to put it politely. I have decided that I will swear less than on my previous presentation, because I'm trying to become a better person. But I will still use the word fuck more than anyone you will probably listen to today. So where is Ruby today? It still has one killer application, Ruby on Rails, but Rails is today viewed as something somewhat boring, and some people would actually say crazy things like Rails is the new Java Enterprise Edition, which is kind of scary and leads me to believe that we have some issues in the Ruby community. There are also questions like, aren't all the cool developers doing closure already? And here, Yuan will answer the question. Hell yeah! I will read his lines because he's joining us remotely. We have a great connection. Anyways, there was a lot of innovation in Rails back in the day. And by back in the day, this is the time span which I'm referring to. Convention over configuration was popularized then, which was very helpful for poor Java developers like me. Interactive development was made very popular. People were firing up their Rails console, evaluating Ruby snippets on the fly, and inspecting the state of their application, which was very useful and very powerful. Scaffolding was made very popular. Then we realized it was a very bad idea and nobody uses it anymore. Active Record came as the simple version of the complex object relational mappers of the day, like Hibernate. Many people thought that Active Record was a step in the right direction. Personally, I think that it was 10 steps in a very wrong direction, but over the years, it has reached a point in which it is maybe 3 steps in the wrong direction, so it is getting there. Ruby on Rails was one of the first popular web frameworks to adopt REST, or at least something they called REST, which is also rather close to what REST is supposed to be, but still. And the innovation in Rails today is kind of sad. The Ruby developers have heard about turbolinks. Yeah, thanks, David. Recently, we added support for foreign keys in Active Record, and this was deemed as tremendous innovation, although probably we should have done this in version 1. We added support for background jobs, which would probably have been done in version 2 of Rails. So it seems that the Ruby train is losing steam, pun intended. But you know, if you ask Rails' creator, DHH, Rails is perfect, we have no problems. And you know what else is perfect? Yeah, the design of the legendary Wada vehicle was never changed because it was perfect and you cannot build atop perfection. It doesn't make any sense. But do any of you actually want to purchase a Lada? I doubt. I doubt this very much. Although I hear that they already have some collector's value, so who knows, maybe in 10 years it might be a good idea. At any rate, despite all the problems with Rails in recent years, still 90% of all the Ruby developers doing web development are using Rails, and only 4% of all Ruby developers aren't doing web. So, no. In the words of Yuan, there is something pretty wrong with the Ruby community. All of us are using a framework which is behind its glory days. Excuse me. But we don't really have an alternative, because every single alternative to Rails which was developed in the recent years was squashed or merged into Rails, and in the end we have Rails, nothing but Rails. And enough about Rubylandia. Let's move on to web development in general, something that will be of interest to most of you, I guess. I have noticed that over the years, this has been a recurrent pattern in web development. We start with something really simple, say static HTML pages. We start adding features and features, making things more powerful, but this power comes at a cost, and the cost is obviously complexity. It becomes harder and harder to develop modern web applications. We can speculate what exactly this chart shows. Maybe here we were all doing static web pages. Here we started doing something dynamic with Perl. Here we decided that using Java for web backends was a good idea. Here we decided that it was a good idea to use Java Enterprise Edition. And here Rails came up and radically simplified things. And I'll talk a bit more about what happened next. So this is the state of the web development using a typical web framework back in the day, exactly 10 years ago. We had models, controllers, views, everything was running on the server. Pretty much nobody was using JavaScript back in the day, not even for client-side data validation. We were just rendering some markup on the server and serving it to the browser. It was simple, it was elegant, and it was a fun time to be a web developer. Going 1 year forward, Ajax was all the rage. Some JavaScript libraries, which I will collectively refer to as random.js, appeared as well. So we had something on the client, but still, it seems rather innocent. Going forward a few years, the backend becomes more complex. We decided that using REST is a good idea. We adopted in our frameworks things like the asset pipeline to optimize the way in which our assets are handled. Fast forward a couple of years, and we decided that it was a great idea to have a client-side model view controller framework as well, and ideally it will have some asset handling of its own. And I don't know about you, but it seems to me that this is crazy. And you know why it seems to me that this is crazy? Because it is fucking crazy. So, is there a solution to all this complexity? If we ask Yuan, he will tell you that the solution is going back to Visual Basic Script. Why is this? After spending some time with Visual Basic Script, everything else would seem perfectly safe to you. But I propose us going in another direction, maybe a less painful direction, and this is something that others are referring to as isomorphic development. Isomorphic? What's this funny word? Let's consult the dictionary. It says that isomorphic means being of identical or similar form, shape, or structure. Fancy. This is a mathematical term, and it means, in web developer terms, same code runs on the client and on the server. If you're working on something new and you want a fancy name for it, go with a mathematical term. It sounds really great and nobody knows what it means, so you look really smart. So let us go back to the diagram of all the complexity. We see that we have a lot of repetition, model on the server, model on the client. Let's merge them. Let's do this for other layers as well. Oh, this becomes better and better. I wonder what is going to happen now. We will replace the use of REST and AJAX with something that I call AutoSync, and I'll speak about it in a bit. And ideally, we also want to unify asset management, because this is important. And this is not the weather forecast for today, although it might be somewhat similar. This is my fancy way of introducing to you the Vault web framework, the core of my presentation today. So, Vault is an isomorphic web framework, which is great. But what does it mean? It means that the models, the views, the controllers, and the routing of our application are using a shared code base. You don't write a separate code base for the server and a separate one for the client. Sounds really cool. And Yuan agrees, so it must be cool. I guess that there are many JavaScript developers here in the audience, so some of you might be thinking about Meteor.js, and yeah, Vault is not the pioneer in the isomorphic web development field. Meteor.js is, for sure, but Vault has one critical advantage over Meteor.js, that you have Ruby code running on the server side and Ruby code running on the client side. Let me reiterate this, and again, the important part. Fucking Ruby on the client side. Why is this important? It is important because Ruby is a much better programming language than JavaScript. I would go as far as to say that Ruby is an actual programming language, and I have a scientific proof for this. I googled for Ruby sucks, and I got just 1,700,000 pages. And you know, so there you have it. Ruby is definitely the better language, and I even have a serious slide about this. So, you know, Ruby doesn't have this, and when you don't have this, you don't have all the this-related problems of JavaScript. Ruby actually has same mute semantics, you know, people aren't getting crazy dealing with news. There is no need for a book called Ruby the Good Parts, because most of Ruby is its good parts, although I do have a talk called Ruby the Bad Parts, but it's a short talk. Ruby has a standard library, believe it or not. You don't need a third-party JavaScript library for trivial things. And do you really need to hear more advantages of Ruby? You should be convinced by now. Ruby is a better language. And Yuan agrees as well. So, how does all this magic happen? It happens because of Opal. Opal is Ruby to JavaScript transpiler, a pretty cool project. I know that it sounds kind of strange to use something like this in production. I had my misgivings whether something like this would actually work, but I had used CoffeeScript in the past, so I had some idea that it might work. On the other hand, CoffeeScript is a very thin layer of abstraction built on top of JavaScript, and Ruby and JavaScript have a bit more differences. So, the short answer is yes. And this bit of beautiful Ruby code will be compiled to this bit of somewhat ugly JavaScript code, but it will behave exactly the same. Is Opal any good? Is a question that is harder to answer. Some aspects of Opal are really nice, and some are not that nice, and I will go over this rather quickly. So, in Opal we have source maps, which means that debugging applications using Opal in production is easier than it sounds because you get pretty Ruby stack traces, you'll be able to jump through the original Ruby source, and you won't have to deal with the compiled JavaScript, at least not most of the time. Opal is compatible with Ruby to a large extent, which is nice, especially if you know Ruby. It has a tiny footprint. Some people are worried that when they use a transpiled language with a big standard library, loading its assets will take a lot of time, a lot of bandwidth, but this is not the case for Opal. And because this is just a transpiler without some additional VM bridge or something like this, the performance of an application written in Opal is pretty close to the application written in plain JavaScript or CoffeeScript. So you definitely don't have to worry about performance that much. There is some tiny performance hit, but it is tiny indeed. And as far as compatibility goes, Opal implements most of Ruby 2.0. It implements pretty much the entire standard library, which is the biggest win, apart from the infinitely better syntax and semantics of the language. And there is one tiny difference, which is not tiny. In Ruby, the strings are mutable. In JavaScript, they are not. By the way, this is the only thing that is better in JavaScript. So I actually view this incompatibility between Ruby and Opal as a good thing, and I hope that something like this will happen in the past. But you know, Yuan is impressed with the features. He says publish shit only when he's really excited, and he's excited right now. And something even more exciting is coming, and this is a quick glimpse of Vault's architecture. This is a typical MVC framework like Rails. You have a controller responding to HTTP requests. It fetches data from the model. It stores this data in, say, an instance variable in Rails, and this is rendered by a view. It is pretty simple, pretty standard. Vault, on the other hand, is not a model view controller framework. It's a model view model framework. And the crucial difference is that the data flow from the view is twofold. Data goes from the model to from the controllers or the view model, depending on what terminology you prefer, to the view, and the other way around. Because most of the real work involved actually happens in the browser, a controller is actually the context in which a view is getting executed. So this takes a bit of time to wrap your mind around. Vault is also a reactive web framework, which means that data changes to the model are automatically propagated to the UI layer, and changes to data in the views are automatically synchronized with the backend. This isn't done using HTTP. There is no JSON API involved. This is done for a persistent connection, a WebSocket connection. And I think that this is really the right direction where we should be going, because developing a JSON API certainly makes sense if you have many different clients, but if your only client is your single-page client-side application, developing a separate API for this is crazy. And yeah, it is crazy. So let's leverage modern technologies and benefit from them. The templates employed by Vault's views are pretty standard, plain markup with embedded Ruby code. This is pretty cool, but this is embedded Ruby code that is actually getting executed in your browser, which is the really important part. This is very confusing for Rails developers who are used to think that anything that is Ruby embedded is actually executed on the server side. The controllers involved, although running in the browser, are also plain, beautiful Ruby code you have some model or some data collection, you add stuff to it, and magic happens. And this is a bit more complex example showing you how to generate a table using Ruby. I won't go into much details about this because I cannot teach you the internals of Vault in a few minutes, but I hope that you'll be interested enough to go and read the documentation afterwards and to play with the framework. And this is the scary part. This is how I feel right now, because I'm going to do a live demo to give you an idea what Vault is all about. And in my experience, all those demos go very, very bad for me. So let us see what is going to happen right now. So I will exit my presentation for a bit. And I will show you Safari web browser. This is a Vault application, a simple to-do application, which is also the Hello World application for Vault. I have opened it in two separate tabs of my browser, and you can see that if I add something here and go to the other tab, they are automatically synchronized. If I change the state of any element here, first notice how the DOM was updated, because I checked an item, pretty sweet. And the interesting bit is that this happened in the other client as well, and this will happen if 10 clients were connected, or 1,000, or whatever. And something else that is kind of interesting is that if you start editing your code, for instance, what can I change here? For instance, I can change the title. Fuck, something is wrong with my keybind right now. I told you there will be an issue.
Zoom in. Can you change the font size?
Yes, of course I can. Everything is possible. This is the most powerful editor in the world, and you know, one day it will bring balance to the source. So let us change this. We just save it. Go back to the browser, and you know, the Vault framework automatically synced and rewarded the code which I changed, which is pretty handy in development, and it is a step more from using a PHP or a Ruby server-side framework. But I won't go into details. I will go back to my presentation because I'm running a bit short of time. I hope you just got an idea of what is possible with Vault. So there are many interesting bits about Vault. For instance, it has a component architecture. You are encouraged to separate the portions of your web application into separate components which are interacting with each other. They encapsulate view logic, business logic, and this leads to a leaner and cleaner design of your complete application. The Vault framework is one of the few web frameworks that comes with user management baked in. You don't have to use a third-party solution to handle user management, and the rationale behind this is that pretty much every web application deals with users. We should make this simpler instead of harder. There is the notion of tasks. This is how do I explain it simply? If you need to run something only on the server instead of on the server and the client, you wrap it into a task. Tasks aren't used that often, but they do have their uses, and that's pretty much the big picture. Going forward, I have to say that Vault is not perfect. You shouldn't start using it in production just yet. The project was announced very recently on the Ruby conference in San Diego in, I think, November last year. There are portions of the framework that still need polish. For instance, Opal hasn't reached complete Ruby compatibility yet, but it is pretty usable. Right now, Vault supports just a single persistence data store, and this is MongoDB, which is kind of unfortunate, but this will certainly be changed. There are many features right now which are work in progress, meaning they break up between releases, and the documentation is definitely not the greatest documentation in the world. Many features have just a half a page of documentation or 1 page, and the features are not exactly trivial. So I would like to encourage you to contribute to Vault if you liked what you saw. The team could really use your help. This is where the repo and the code live. And I really hope that even if Vault it is not the answer to the complexity of web development, a similar solution is, and that by the end of next year we will have the next big revolution in web development, and we will manage to bring down the complexity in our lives once more to zero. We can bring the happiness back, the joy back, and just love our work. And you know, hell yeah, Yuan certainly agrees with me, and this is pretty cool. Also, just some resources that you can check out in case you're wondering what to do, how to get started with Vault. I will share this presentation with all of you after I'm done. And that's the end. Thanks for coming. It was really nice being here. So I won't take questions now. I'd like to invite to the stage TopTal's CTO, Alexander Danilenko, who'd like to say a few words. Because we're an evil company and we love ruining nice developer events.
Hey everyone, how are you doing today? Okay, everyone's sleeping, but okay, so actually I'll ask you to wake up for a moment and I'll ask you to think. Sorry, I'm sure that you are not for this here, but I'll ask you. Have you ever thought how freaking lucky you are? How freaking lucky we are to be software developers? We are working in the most rapidly growing market. And every day we got new tools, we got new frameworks, languages, new technologies, and new working culture, and lots of other stuff. Yeah? So, and it got to the point where to actually do your job and do your job good, all you need is a laptop and internet connection. Yeah? So, and the worst things that you can do in this environment and is actually stop moving forward, stop learning, and never forget about this. Yeah? And this is something that we have in our TopTal bones. Yeah? This is something that we follow as a business. We always move forward, and we have really long-term goals. We have really huge ambitions and skills and ability to change development market. Yeah? And I won't go into details what TopTal does, but all you need to know is for you as a software developer, TopTal does your life better. If you want to know how, please reach out to my colleagues and they'll explain. But I'm here to say about something else, yeah, so which is more exciting for me as a CTO of TopTal, is that we are actually hiring for our development team. And if you want to work in the best development team and in the most ambitious company in the market, you are welcome. It's of course very challenging, and if you are a rockstar developer who is willing to code in Ruby or JavaScript, please welcome. We have this super complicated email, join@opal.com. Or you can reach out to me or Bozhidar and we'll talk. And the last one thing is that why our team is the best in the world. Obviously, you expect this to hear from a CTO, but I have proof. We adopt our remote culture of 100%. We are a team of, 100 core team members probably, and we don't have an office. Everyone is completely distributed all over the world, and I can't name countries where our developers are located because they constantly change. We are constantly traveling, and that's why I'm here today. And with all this stuff, we actually managed to develop pretty sophisticated piece of software, and at the same time support open source, support new initiatives, speak on conferences, and live the fun life. That's the main part. So you are, again, don't forget about it. You are software developers, you are super lucky, and if you don't enjoy your lives, then you're doing something wrong, and we can help you change this. So yeah, that's it from me. And
okay, we have 10 minutes for questions for Bozhidar.
Hi, so I'm not a Ruby developer, and I don't like JavaScript as well, and I don't like PHP and so on and so on. I'm Java developer. That doesn't matter. ECMAScript 6 is quite nice. I believe it's better than, and it's closer for front-end developers to Ruby. But my question is other, and it is using Vault. Basically, what you show, you are mixing in HTML two languages, and this is anti-pattern, and it's a crap. It's a joke. I mean, you should not mix two languages in a single file, and that's why the front-end developers usually don't mix JavaScript in the HTML. This looks like the PHP from the 98, from the 90s, and GSP, like the first GSP versions. So it looks like 15 years ago.
First of all, ECMAScript 6 doesn't really exist yet. So if you can write in something that doesn't exist, be my guest. There are transpilers for this as well. But you're missing the big picture. I'm pretty sure that Vault isn't the solution to all of our problems, but I'm pretty sure that isomorphic development is. The templating language may or may not be shit, but duplicating half your application logic is definitely an anti-pattern in my book. Using a protocol like HTTP in 2015, when we have so many alternative solutions, especially I'm referring to WebSockets. Yeah, if you start using WebSockets, you'll fuck everyone using another browser, but I frankly don't care about this. I want to motivate people to go forward, to adopt newer technologies, and I really believe that without some disruptive changes, disruptive innovation, this is not going to happen. People are used to some patterns, to some technologies, to some ways of organizing their work, and they're so used to them that they believe that because they are familiar with something, the thing is actually simple, which is definitely not the case. I could have spoken here about ClojureScript, and this was my original idea, but I decided to talk about something that would resonate with more people. And I hope this answers your question. We have to start thinking about the problem. We shouldn't question one potential solution.
Okay, we have to change our microphone, so I will speak this one. My question is about the demo you have just made about the auto-syncing. What is the role that server. You said no problem for 10 clients, but what actually happens if you have this thing between hundreds of clients?
I have no idea. I haven't tried it, but I read in a blog post that it can scale pretty well. I will trust the author of the framework. Really, without me trying it, I can only speculate.
Yeah. Very fast question is if, because I don't like the anti-pattern of mixing two languages, is there part of Vault, you said it's open source, you can contribute and so on, so is there a project for making a taglet or whatever that actually is XML-like and that actually gives you all the power that the Ruby language gives you, like these 4 cycles that you show and so on, but using XML, which means that you are staying in the same domain for the view. Is there a project like that, or is there an idea, or?
To my knowledge, there is no such project, but as you said, it's open source. They're looking for interesting add-ons to the framework, and this is one place that you can pitch in and help out.
Last question.
I like your strong opinions on things, but you never mentioned anything about Mongo. So I'd like to hear, if possible, with examples and what are the good parts and the bad parts of MongoDB, because there's a lot of noise around it these days, and I'm not particularly a fan, but I'd like to hear more from you.
Well, I have had issues in the past with the data integrity guarantees of Mongo, which are guarantees in, yeah, you know what I mean. I hear that things have been improved recently, but after my previous experience, I wasn't very eager to try MongoDB again. And I have a general issue with schemaless databases because the idea is that there is no schema, but there is always a schema, but you're replacing an explicit schema, which you can type check, with an implicit schema that you can't really type check. There is an excellent essay by Martin Fowler on the subject, and it resonates really great with my view on schemaless NoSQL databases. So this is my general issue. I have tiny implementation. I had issues with the particular implementation of MongoDB, but I have also general issues with the NoSQL movement in general.
Thank you very much for that. My main problem with Vault is that we don't know yet whether other data stores will be supported, because we have the example of Locomotive, for example, which was a good idea or somewhat of a good idea, and then they support only mobile, and it's not really usable, especially as you know in Rails CMS is a nightmare. My next question would be, are you using that top-down Vault?
Well, we would be crazy to do so. As Alexander told you, we are a good company and we make smart decisions. This is just a hobby of mine, playing with Vault, and we're doing nothing with it right now, but who knows, maybe in the future. I know for a fact that Ryan Stout, the creator of Vault, will add support for other data stores pretty soon. He mentioned in Gitter that he's really close to releasing support for RethinkDB and potentially for other NoSQL stores, and that there will be for sure support for PostgreSQL down the road. So I really believe that it's just a matter of how much steam will Vault be able to pick up along the way. If there is interest in the framework, the data store problem will be solved for sure.
Okay, thank you very much.